Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us on Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week gone by, Ghana witnessed its presidential and national elections, which have both been termed generally peaceful and fair. A few observer groups on the ground have put out initial reports on the conduct of the elections, and we shall be examining them in a bit with the Deputy Executive Director, West Africa Network for Peacebuilding, WANEP for short, Lavina Mensah. She'll be joining us from Ghana. This is one of few elections holding in the sub-region during the pandemic, so it will be interesting to get her thoughts on the conduct of the polls. But let's begin with a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles.
A delegation from the Nigerians and Diaspora Commission, led by its chairman Abike Dabiri-Arewa, was on ground at the Murtala Mohammed Airport to receive 35-year-old Omowumi Roda Aladiboyeje, who was rescued from Cairo in Egypt. Omowumi was trafficked on March 17, 2020, and claimed to be sexually harassed frequently, beaten and imprisoned at home sometimes. She had been deceived by a family member that she will be going to America, only to end up in a nightmare. Now in Nigeria, the auxiliary nurse will be spending time in her hometown in Okitipupa in Ondo State. We joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in mourning the demise of the Nigerian ambassador to the United States, Justice Sylvanus Adewere Nsofo. The 85-year-old died in a Maryland hospital on the night of December the 10th. Before his death, Justice Nsofo was appointed to the United States on November the 13th, 2017, his first ambassadorial posting after his retirement from the Court of Appeal. During the week, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded to an announcement by the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo designating Nigeria a country of concern under the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. The Nigerian government debunked the statement, saying the government remains committed to ensuring the respect and protection of all citizens' rights to religious freedom and promotion of religious tolerance and harmony. Mr. Pompeo released a statement saying millions of Nigerians have continued to live in fear for their lives and several thousands have been brutally murdered because of their faith, emphasizing the Trump administration has made it clear that it will fight to defend and advance the inalienable right to worship freely and to live in accordance with one's faith.
Beyond our shores now, as the UK and the EU agree to continue postBrexit trade talks, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says both sides are on the very last mile. She made the comments via video link at an event to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD.
We're on the very last mile to go, but it's an essential one. And we want a level playing field. We want a level playing field not only at the start, but also over time. And this is the architecture we are building. And we are fine about the architecture itself, but the details in it, do they really fit? And these are crucial points because, again, it's a matter of fairness. It's a matter of fair competition, and we want to ensure that.
Meanwhile, the Commission spokesperson Daniel Ferry says the bloc is fully dedicated to clinching a deal, but that it is aware that time is running out.
It's aware that time is short. The more time that goes by, the less likely it is that we will have a deal in place on the 1st of January. That's just a statement of fact. As for what might happen in the coming days, you'll also understand that I cannot tell the future, or I cannot say what may or may not happen over these days. What I can say, though, is that we are fully dedicated to trying to reach a deal with the UK.
I want to remind folks that we do. You're like, lady, wait a minute here.
Oh, you answered.
Yeah. So here we go.
The University of Pittsburgh Medical Center has begun administering the Pfizer BioNTech Covid19 vaccine to its employees.
She's still smiling. Our next candidate is Dr. Sylvia Owusu Ansah. Please, Sylvia, have a seat. Sylvia is an emergency medicine physician. And she has been on the front line taking care of our pediatric COVID patients.
UPMC Chief Quality Officer Tammy Mina, who is also a registered nurse, gave the injections to each individuals, and they said they would receive the second dose in 21 days.
Each of these employees, as you will know, will continue to use all precautions for keeping the rest of our staff and our patients safe. For the current period of time. They will be back in 21 days for another round with us to get the second half of their vaccine. We as an organization will be moving forward over the next several weeks of getting our vaccines out to our high priority employees first, and then working through the rest of our employee populations and to our community. We clearly have weeks and months to go, but we are so excited to take this first step today.
Welcome back. Hundreds of observers came from around the world to monitor the elections in Ghana on December 7th. Ghana has been a beacon of democracy for West Africa, and the country has been touted as having one of the best democracies in the sub-region. But that's not to say observers did not have a thing or two to point out to the West African nation regarding its elections.
It's the morning of December the 7th, and the day Ghanaians have been waiting for has arrived. It's election day in the small West African country with a population of over 31 million people. The citizens are up bright and early for what will be a decider over who becomes president and for the national election. As with most elections in Africa, the presence of observers monitoring the election tends to add more credibility to results announced and the general view of the polls. This year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the numbers were greatly reduced due to restrictions with travel, and yet they still came in large numbers. Locally, the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, CODIO, an independent and non-partisan locally based network of civil society groups, faith-based organization and professional bodies, said it was expecting to deploy over 4,000 observers. The EU expected to deploy 80 observers on election day, in addition to 40 long-term observers from the 26 EU member countries. The African Union deployed only 21 short-term observers drawn from members of Pan-African Parliament, representatives from civil society organizations, and independent election experts from African Union member states led by former South African President Kgalema Motlanthe. Other international groups that deployed observers include Regional Power, ECOWAS, led by former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the Commonwealth and WANEP, among others. According to its initial report, ECOWAS said voting started as early as 7 a.m. in most parts of the country, and political parties as well as their followers respected the prohibition of display of party colors and symbols, while COVID-19 protocols were observed as well. The elections were generally deemed free and fair, but there was report of the arrest of 2 Electoral Commission officers who allegedly tampered with presidential ballot in Awutu Senya West and Baku Central. It reported an isolated case of shooting in Kaswa, Awutu Senya East constituency in the central region, as well as a case of double voting in Ailum Down, Accra. The African Union observation team made similar observations with elections being conducted peacefully, but noticed security officers were present at polling units visited and that the stations were accessible to people with disabilities and elderly voters. It also noted that international and domestic observers were granted unrestricted access to the polling stations and were allowed to conduct their duties without interference. Down at the Situation Room for Electoral Violence Monitoring Analysis and Mitigation, where 350 observers were situated, some polling stations were said to have had problems with voting materials, and some areas reported clashes between agents of the two main political parties, the NPP and the NDC. The EU Observer Mission flagged problems of transparency of campaign finance and misuse of state resources in the elections, though it agreed the election was conducted in a free and fair manner. Chief Observer Lavina said unregulated campaign finance, the reportedly common practice of vote buying, and the prevalent misuse of state resources for electioneering purposes did not contribute to creating a level playing field among contestants, and pointed out that there were only a trickle of women on the ballot box. And though incumbent Nana Akufo-Addo won the election by 51.59% of votes, according to the Electoral Commission, and was declared winner, his main challenger, John Mahama, has faltered the election, accusing the Commission of presiding over a fraudulent outcome, and has pledged to take, in his words, all legitimate steps to reverse the travesty of justice. It says there was a deliberate plan to manipulate and predetermine the result of the election in favor of Mr. Nana Akufo-Addo. NDC lawyers are reportedly auditing the result sheets, known as pink forms, from the country's 38,000 polling stations, and intends to challenge the result at the Supreme Court.
Joining me now on the program is Deputy Executive Director and Head of Programs at the West Africa Network for Peacebuilding, one of the observer teams that monitored the election in Ghana on the ground and in the Situation Room. Mrs. Lavina Adai Mensah, thank you for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon to your listeners and viewers.
Now, many of the observer groups say that the election was generally free and fair and also peaceful. Is that your assessment of the election as well?
So WANEP did also deploy monitors on the ground, as you have already indicated, and we worked with a number of institutions in Ghana, also reputable in terms of election management. And assessment was that generally we had peaceful elections, relatively peaceful elections. Of course, we had the isolated incidents, and every incident we consider quite important, and especially does involve some loss of life. Sorry, some loss of life. Yes, then absolutely. But generally speaking, I think it was relatively free and fair.
Some groups, such as the EU, have reported vote buying during the elections, the misuse of state resources by the Electoral Commission, as well as the underrepresentation of women in the electoral process. Do you agree with any of these observations?
Yeah, so underlying our election observation is a period of about 6 to a year where we do some mapping, identify some hotspots, set indicators, before we actually deploy on the D-Day for actual elections. And throughout that process, yes, gender was one of the things that we focused on. And I think that reflects on the broader challenges we have within our governance systems, where we continue to have underrepresentation of women for various reasons. And so this was the basis for this. We did, however, see a slight improvement in terms of presidential candidates that we had for the elections. In 2020, that we had 3 women who had presented themselves as candidates. But beyond the 3 women, there are indeed broader issues into gender, which we absolutely agree with in some of the statements or reports that other observers have given. There were, of course, the violations here and there that we also picked up. But again, as I said, generally speaking, I think we could speak of free and fair elections, but also importantly to say that in some of the isolated cases that our money picked up on the ground, it's also worth mentioning that there was the level of responsiveness we saw coming from various stakeholders responsible for addressing those either infractions or incidents. And we note that as quite positive as well.
Do you believe the Electoral Commission of Ghana is independent, as some groups have called for that as well, that the Electoral Commission be left independent. They're probably indicating, just as the opposition presidential candidate also said, some indicating that there were situations that made it seem like the Electoral Commission was not running independently.
The point I was trying to make was that I think your question reflects a broader issue of confidence and trust among the political actors. And this is something that we are seeing not just in Ghana, but across Africa, I would even put it, where for one reason or the other, and from a conflict prevention point of view, narrow it down to a lack of a space and a conducive space for dialogue, for consensus building around some of these things, such as appointments and so on that happen. And so these sort of feed into some of the narratives around lack of independence and lack of credibility. But I think the bigger issue is for us is how do we look at kind of inclusive processes that allow for people to be able to be part of the decision makings around such critical decisions, such as appointments to state institutions. I think that's something that forward we need to pay much more attention to, because ultimately there will always be the perceptions that exist, whether real or perceived. I think it does impact on how we see processes. And so I think for us, in the post-election phase and in terms of doing an assessment, I think those are things that we want to look at. These are things that happen well before the election itself. And most of the time, because we tend to wait till we're very close to elections before we start intervening, by then, of course, it's too late to address some of these things. You can't build trust in a month or two. This is something that has to happen over time. And so how we look at that process immediately after the elections have happened and see how we build those consensus or dialogue platforms for those conversations to happen and to begin to have some rapport among political actors is key.
Ghana has been described as a beacon of democracy, not just for West Africa, but also for the continent. Elections in the past have been praised for their transparency, the orderly conduct, and the lack of widespread controversy. So how well do you think that Ghana upheld these principles in the most recent concluded elections?
I think over the years, yes, you're right. This is something that Ghana, a title that has been bestowed upon us, and we may have earned it. But I think what we see is that over the years, it's become more and more challenging in terms of, trying to organize the elections. And I think one of the reasons that, again, go back to the issue of trust, one of the issues that we have been dealing with the electoral process, again, is the widening trust deficit. And therefore, all these come to play on how the elections are organized, and the issues around controversies are further heightened within that context. So in terms of the last elections, the just ended elections, of course, we saw and we're seeing that there are many more issues emerging in terms of agreements on, even the results and so on. So, but I also see in that in itself opportunities for engagement, opportunities because we are forced to resolve the from a conflict prevention point of view. When you have situations like that, these are opportunities for communication, opportunities for relationship building. So I think that we also have, even though things have become changing, I think within the challenges themselves are opportunities for us to further build on what we have and strengthen the democracy. Democracy is not just about the elections and the focus on elections. And so we're being described as, and so the elections itself is just a part of it. How we move beyond the elections to actually governing the country, which then really reflects the broader or what kind of democracy we have. I think we need to also focus on that aspect. And I see currently that within the current phase of status of affairs, that we do have a lot of opportunities to strengthen that democracy. begin to look at how we use the opportunity for consensus building, how we use the opportunity for relationship building, for rapprochement between political actors, because whether we like it or not, we have two key sides in the election phase, and they will have to work together. And more than ever, they have to find that space to be able to engage with one another and depend on one another. So I think we also have opportunity to strengthen that democracy.
Finally, now that the NDC especially is contesting not just the process of the elections, but the outcome, and also intends to carry this on to the Supreme Court, what could happen now, between now and January 7, when the inauguration takes place?
Well, I think the NDC has its position. Election results have been officially declared. So obviously we do have a contestation which we have to deal with. And I'm saying that quite a number of actors have also realized, including the parties themselves, have realized that there's the need to engage. Of course, the laws are very clear in terms of what needs to be. You are not happy with one result or the other, that you can go to court. But we all know what the court does. The courts work based on the law, and is based on address the problem. But then, of course, there are relationships that, and whenever that court process happens, if indeed it will happen, it's also important to recognize how we can begin to build a platform that allows the parties to continue to engage with one another, so that those relationships can be mended and can be strengthened, even if one party is going to go to, because as I said again, given the current status we are in, we have a situation where whatever determination is made in the end in terms of who has won the parliamentary elections, it's going to be a very narrow margin. Parties will have to find a way of working together. And so court will deal with the problem if it means we have to go to court and one party agrees to go to court. But then beyond the court is the bigger issue of how do we come together? We would have another 4 years in which we have to govern this country. And within those 4 years, we could have a very turbulent journey ahead. And if we're going to succeed or work through the journey, it's important that we begin to find, that space of how we are going to come together, or the two parties are going to be able to come together more than ever, so that we can have able to surmount the challenges of trying to get two sides of a parliament on a consensus.
Mrs. Lavina Adai Mensah, thank you again for speaking with me. We're wishing Ghana all the best as it prepares for the inauguration on January 7, and we're hoping that the rest of Africa can have peaceful elections as we all try to make things better. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. All the best.
This is where we end the program today. It's been a pleasure having you join me. Let's meet again next week, God willing. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Take care now.